Plant-based, there's a number of different definitions as well. So if we're looking at complete vegan, look, there's definitely benefits to it in terms of most people are forced to eat more vegetables and fruits, and we know that most, particularly Australians, but most people around the world are not getting their adequate serves of fruits and vegetables over the week. It generally includes a lot of good quality fats and grains and complex carbohydrates. From an athlete perspective, I don't necessarily encourage it, because I think there's a lot of vitamins and minerals that are at risk of being deficient from an athlete perspective. I will still work with athletes that will be, plant-based from a number of different reasons. However, we just got to be mindful that we're on top of making sure that their diet is complete in those, and then looking at blood tests to make sure that we're not deficient, and if so, then we're going to have to use supplements. I still encourage people to eat particularly oily fish, eggs and dairy products, because there's just so many benefits to all three of those. Again, there's lots of controversial sort of arguments against those three options as well, and there's pros and cons to everything. So I'm not saying that it's perfect, but it's also going to be a lot easier to get in a complete sort of a vitamin and mineral profile by including those three foods. And I still encourage people to eat a little bit of red meat. I generally sort of aim for only sort of 1 or 2 serves of red meat throughout the week.
What are the key vitamins and minerals that people being on a plant-based diet should be aware of?
So there's a couple that I'm really mindful of, calcium in particular. So really important for bone health, obviously. Iron, zinc, and then B12 are all at risk of deficiency with a plant-based diet as well. Often what I find in plant-based diets is people really struggle to get their total protein content in. So from a macronutrient perspective, we've got to be mindful that we're using lots of tofu and soy products as an alternative, legumes, lentils. Whole grains will still have a protein content to them as well. However, it's generally a bit harder, particularly for athletes who might have a higher protein intake than the general public. But yeah, as I said, calcium, vitamin B12, iron and zinc are the 4 that I'm looking for, in particular because most of the food sources are going to come from animal products to tick off those vitamins and minerals.
So yeah, it's harder to get the protein in, but is it impossible?
No, definitely not impossible. And I've worked with a number of athletes that have still been on a plant-based diet and have been training a lot and consider themselves athletes. So not impossible, just a little bit more challenging, and they just need to be a little bit more prepared over the week to make sure that they're getting, again, their protein spread over the day. And then the variety is often difficult as well because we're limited with the types of proteins. But definitely not impossible to get there.
Yeah, should those vitamins we've been talking about, should these be monitored more in a plant-based diet?
Definitely. So I would encourage any sort of plant-based athlete to be checking in with a dietitian, ideally a sports dietitian as well, so they've got an understanding of the requirements of an athlete. But I should mention as well, calcium is very difficult to monitor. So we can test iron, B12 and zinc in a blood test. Whereas calcium, we can test it in a blood test, but calcium is also very tightly regulated in the bloodstream. So when we're taking a blood test, generally it's not showing if you're eating enough calcium, because if we're not consuming enough calcium, what the blood will do or the body will do is draw calcium from the bones into the bloodstream. So the risk of that, particularly as an athlete, is that the bone density is becoming more brittle and reducing because there's not enough calcium to turn over the bone cells, but a blood test isn't going to show that up. Generally, if you're acutely sick, it might show a calcium deficiency, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not eating enough, and vice versa. Just because a blood test will show adequate calcium doesn't mean you're actually eating enough. So the only way to check is looking at how much you're having in your diet. And a dietitian can do that for you, but you can look at that through different tracking apps and things like that as well. Because we're looking for somewhere from 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams of calcium which is quite a high dose if you're not going to be having 3 serves of dairy over the day. So even people who are consuming animal products, it's actually quite difficult to get to that amount. Dairy products are not the only things that contain calcium though. Tofu, for example, is quite often, and soy milks and plant-based milks often are supplemented with calcium as well. So it's possible, it's just something that needs to be calculated out.